and floating above it is like this black smoke, and it almost looks like there's like a fire inside of it, coals, embers, sort of glowing red and black, and it's hovering over him. And as soon as his mom opens up the door, it's like this presence, this smoke became aware of her, and it just dissipated.
So, once again you found yourself at the campsite of the Orator. Oh, please pull up a chair. As you can see, my fire is stoked, which means tonight I have another tale to tell. But before we begin, if you find yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, and it allows me to continue to do what I love, which is telling terrifying tales. Second, all of my stories are first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. Today's story comes from a Redditor by the name of Seekerofthesublime. I will link his original story in the comments below. But if you or anybody you know has a story that you would like featured one day here on The Orator, then please reach out to me on any of my social media, and we'll find a time to get together, collect your story, and hopefully feature it one day here on The Orator. And lastly, I did have a contest running from June through July. I am going to announce the winners later this week on my channel. Congratulations to the lucky 7 winners. By the end of this week, I'll have your packages out, and you will get all the stuff that you were supposed to have gotten for the contest. So I'm super excited for those who won. Like I said, I will announce that later this week, and we will run another contest when we close in on 1,000 subscribers, which we are rapidly doing, so thank you guys so much. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to today's story. It is a tale that I call The Jinn. So Amir is born in the Middle East, and for the first couple of years of his life, that's where him and his mom and dad and his 2 brothers and sister lived. And his mom stayed at home with the kids, and his dad was an extremely prominent figure in both politics and the oil industry. So he had a lot of power and a lot of political sway, and he worked with a lot of very high-end people. And when Amir was 6, they ended up moving from the Middle East to Canada, and they ended up moving because of a job position that his dad was going to take, and it was an increase in pay and a lot more responsibility, but they had to move. But they were all very excited about it. And so, at 6 years old, Amir and the rest of his family picked everything up from the Middle East, and they moved to Canada. And they ended up moving to this really interesting place. It was kind of a subdivision that was really huge. All of the houses were these massive brick bungalows, and a lot of them were unoccupied, and the few other ones that were occupied, there was a big distance, and everybody had these really large yards, and everybody else that was there, they were also really high up in the government, and actually they worked for both Canada and Britain, and so they had a lot of attachments to the British royal government and stuff like that. So they were dealing with some very high-end people. And because of that, the space that they were staying in, like I said, it was kind of designated to those people, and so it was a really strange subdivision. Instead of the typical things that you'd see with large houses and grass lawns and things like that, the entire lawn in all of these different houses, it was all sand. And so it was just a very strange subdivision compared to everywhere else around it. And the reason that it's important is because, you know, Amir, he just moves here. He's a 6-year-old boy. He doesn't really have any friends yet. He hasn't gone to school yet. And, you know, this is back in like the late 90s, early 2000s when he finally moves over to Canada. And so this is before kids stayed inside and played on tablets and did stuff with the internet all day. A lot of times kids spent most of their time outside. And so Amir, he's new to this area and he doesn't really know anybody. And so the best thing he can think to do is check out all of these like cool abandoned giant houses in their neighborhood that nobody's living in. And his dad is kind of like, you know what, boys will be boys, go out, have fun. Just, you know, be careful of strangers and things like that. You don't know the area very well, but as long as you stick kind of close to the house, we're in a very safe neighborhood, and I know a lot of the people already that live around here, so go have fun. His mother, however, Totally different story. Now, from a very young age, the one thing that Amir could remember about his mother was that she was extremely spiritual and believed in a lot of different malevolent things that were out there. And one of the things that she constantly warned Amir about was a jinn. And jinn, now the more popular name is kind of genie. But the history of the jinn is very interesting. It's very, very old. In fact, there are mentions of the jinn in the Quran, and it predates the Quran. So we're talking like ancient. And because it's such an old legend, there really isn't a ton of consistency on what a jinn really is. Western culture now, when we think of genies, we think of things like granting wishes and rubbing lamps and coming out of lamps and stuff like that. But the original history of the jinn was completely different. These are creatures that exist on the planet, according to lore, and they're kind of like humans in that they're not like good or evil. They're born with the ability to choose and be influenced, and they have theoretically their own religions and their own belief systems and things like that. But you could run across potentially good jinn who could help you out, and you could run across evil jinn who could do bad things. And his mom was a very firm believer in that. And so one of the things that is very consistent surrounding the jinn lore is that they love to be by themselves, away from humans, and they like sandy areas. And so his mom is thinking this whole area is completely sandy, and all of these houses are abandoned. These would be exact places where you might find a jinn. And so she warned her son not to do that. And he's 6 years old, and he doesn't really believe in that stuff, and he wants to go have fun. And so he kind of decides he's going to ignore his mother's warning. But his mom's not an idiot. She picks up on this perception pretty quickly. And so she says, I didn't want to have to tell you this because you're only 6 years old, but I'm going to do this to protect you. Let me tell you what happened when you were 3 years old. And she proceeds to tell this story. So Amir is 3 years old, and this is all the way, of course, back when he lived in the Middle East. And it's just a typical night, and in fact, it's like the middle of the night, like 2, 3 a.m. And all of a sudden, Amir's mom wakes up out of a total dead sleep, and she's panicked immediately. She just has this horrible, foreboding feeling that something is wrong with her son Amir. And so she gets up out of bed right away, and she runs through the house. She doesn't worry about waiting or waking anybody up or calling anybody. She just thunders through the house, breaks through Amir's door, and as soon as she breaks through, she sees Amir sleeping in his little crib bed, and floating above it is like this sort of like black smoke, and it almost looks like there's like a fire inside of it, coals, embers. It's sort of glowing red and black, and it's hovering over him. And as soon as his mom opens up the door, it's like this presence, this smoke became aware of her, and it just dissipated. And she was so terrified by this that she sat in Amir's room for literally like 3 or 4 nights after that, every single night throughout the whole night, laying over his bed and praying for him. And when she didn't feel like that was working, she actually called in a holy man and had him perform a bunch of cleansing rituals and things like that to cleanse the area of all of the negativity. And basically, she's telling this story to Amir now, and she says, that was a jinn. She said they can take the appearance of a lot of different things. They're shapeshifters. They can look like smoke. They can look invisible. They can look like animals. They can turn into animals if they want to. They can look like people. They're great mimics, and so they're great at mimicking voices and making you think you're hearing things that you're not. And if they do manage to get a hold of you, they can cause all kinds of chaos. Things like sickness, illness, even death. They can do possession. They have a lot of different abilities. And again, the lore speaks to a ton of different stuff, and so certain people believe different things, but it's pretty much widely accepted that they are invisible creatures. They can shapeshift, they can mimic, and they have a lot of control if they can capture you and isolate you. And so she's very worried about all of this, and she also is kind of paranoid about jinn in general because she blames a lot of stuff that happens throughout their lives on jinn phenomenon. Things like if something goes missing and everybody's looking for it, and then all of a sudden it ends up in a very obvious spot. Say they're looking for their keys, they look everywhere, including on the counter, and then once they've exhausted every place and can't think of where else the keys might be, all of a sudden the keys are just on the counter. a lot of people experience those kind of phenomena. It's just these weird little things. They might hear a noise and think it's the house settling, or the lights might flicker and they think it's the electricity. All of these little things, if they ever experience them, his mom attributed them to the jinn. And so her dad was a staunch non-believer. One of his brothers was a staunch non-believer. But, to Amir and to his mom, they took this stuff very seriously. After, his mom explained what happened when he was 3 and the dangers and stuff like that, Amir, he also started to believe that it was possible that the supernatural was out there and that jinn were really a potential threat in his life. And so he took his mom's advice, and he was always careful when he went out and explored, and thankfully, nothing ever really happened to Amir. And so he goes throughout his, young formative years, and his family ends up moving to British Columbia within Canada on the west coast of Canada. And things are going great for Amir at this point. He's extremely popular in school. He's getting great grades, and he has options about where he's going to go when he's done as far as career-wise is concerned. His dad is still doing well and has great connections. He's not only friends with a lot of people at school, but in the new area that they've been living at for a few years, he's made a ton of friends in the neighborhood and the complexes and stuff that he lives around. And he's just like a very well-adjusted, great kid by all counts, Amir is. And everything is going totally normal until one night. He's 18 years old, and it's a totally normal night when all of a sudden, same time, 2, 3 in the morning, Amir wakes up. And he just comes out of a totally dead sleep to being completely awake, and right away he notices some weird stuff is happening. He can't move at all. He can't move any of his fingers or toes, any of his body parts. He's having a hard time even breathing. He can't move his head to either side. He's having a hard time even moving his eyes. It's like he is totally paralyzed. He can't speak. He can barely even make any noises. It's like it's difficult to push air out of his vocal cords to make a noise at all. And so that's the very first thing he notices is that he is totally frozen in place. And as he's moving his eyes around the dark room, he kind of looks to his left, and there's sort of like his desk and a chair sitting next to his bed. And sitting on this chair is this like dark shadow being with these piercing red eyes. And he said it was extremely clear that it was the outline of a person, but it was bright enough in his room that he should have been able to make out features, but there were no features. It was like this solid black mass that looked like a person. And he said, obviously the eyes showed malevolence. They were red and glowing and evil looking. He said, but the scariest part about this thing sitting next to him, and he could do nothing about because he's completely frozen, is that this thing didn't seem to have a mouth at all, but he could still feel that it was smiling at him. And this thing is just looking down at him, and he said he felt evil and malevolence coming out of this thing, but it also was laughing at him. It was almost mocking him. It's like he got the sense that it was enjoying the fact that he was paralyzed. And he's thinking about all of the stuff his mom told him about jinn, and one of the things that sticks out in his mind is that jinn are supposed to be able to induce sleep paralysis, which is basically like a medical condition where when you wake up, you are completely paralyzed. You can't move or do anything. And a lot of times people report seeing things that aren't really there. And so one of the pieces of historical context around jinn is that they are things that can cause sleep paralysis, and then they'll show up looking like something, and you basically sound like you're crazy because everybody knows that during sleep paralysis it's possible to see things that aren't there, and it's just a perfect opportunity for them to kind of work their dark magic. And so he is thinking about the fact that these things can cause sleep paralysis, and it's literally sitting right here smiling at him, and he can feel the radiating evil and laughter coming off of this thing, and it's just staring down at him, and he's totally frozen, and he's thinking, I'm completely helpless. I can do literally nothing right now. And he's trying to scream, he's trying to move, and it's just these soft, he's trying to get help, he's trying to get his mom, and it's all that will come out, and he knows it's too quiet. And this thing is just staring at him. And then all of a sudden, it gets up, and it flies out of the room at this crazy fast pace. And the sleep paralysis immediately breaks, and Amir sits up out of bed, and he's just pouring sweat. And he watches as the jinn rounds the corner and it goes down the hall. And he sits up, and he's sweating, and he's basically just like in his head, thank God this thing is left. I don't know what it did to me, but at least I can move again. And so he's finally breathing again, and he gets up out of bed, and he makes his way out to the kitchen, and he grabs a glass of water, and he's just sitting up there, and in his head he's thinking, was this real? Was I maybe asleep? Was I imagining it? He's going through all of these different scenarios in his head, and he's like, no, I was definitely awake. I sat right up when it left. I'm awake right now in the kitchen. I know what I saw and I experienced. And then as he's kind of contemplating this and putting it together in his head that he's not making this up, he wasn't asleep, he's not crazy, he starts hearing the same type of muffled cries that he was making coming from down the hall. And so he takes his glass and he sets it down, and he slowly starts making his way down the hallway, and he gets outside of his brother's room. Now remember, he is, Amir, he is a firm believer in the supernatural. His brother is not. His brother is basically, anti all of that stuff. He has no belief in anything supernatural, and he just doesn't, he thinks his mom is crazy. He just doesn't want anything to do with it. And so, Amir, he's kind of confused hearing these noises coming from his brother's room, but he slowly opens the door and looks. And it's basically what his mom described happened to Amir when he was 3 is what Amir is seeing right now. He sees his brother in his bed, and he sees this basically like black, fiery fog floating above him. And his brother is just like Amir was, completely paralyzed, can't move, trying to scream, and these desperate little yelps are coming out of him, and it's all that he can muster. And as soon as this black cloud that's hovering above Amir's brother sees Amir come in, it kind of turns, and even though it's like a black cloud, he can feel it turn and look at him. He can feel its eyes upon him, its presence, its menace. And then all of a sudden, just like that, it dissipates into nothing. And Amir's brother sits up, and he's sweating just like Amir was, and he's freaking out, and he's trying to explain to Amir what happened. Amir's like, I understand. And they basically sit down, and for the next hour, they go through their 2 stories and compare them, and they both experience the exact same thing. Amir's brother said he saw this thing sitting next to his bed, red eyes. He said he felt its malice. He saw it smile, even though he didn't have it. I mean, they experienced the exact same phenomenon, and, all Amir could think of is, thank God it left me alone, and that I showed up to help my brother in time, because who knows what would have happened after that. And so they, wait till the next morning, and they go talk to their mom, and they tell her everything that happened. And of course, right away, their mom's like, yep, this is the things I was worried about is what happened to you. And so she gets all of this different equipment, and she goes to both of their rooms, and she spends the entire day basically cleansing the rooms, smudging them and cleaning them and praying over them. And she does it to both rooms extremely thoroughly. And after that, Amir said, thank God she did, because we never experienced anything like that in our bedrooms ever again. But it was like when it happened, a doorway opened for Amir. He said after that happened, he started seeing shadow people all over the place where he never used to see them before. When he stays in other places that aren't in his original bedroom, he experiences sleep paralysis and seeing things. And he said, as worried as he is and as crazy as it all seems, he said he's just spent the last few years doing a ton of research on jinn. And he said doing the research and learning about the lore and the history and the things that they're capable of doing, all of that knowledge, it feels like he gives him power over the situation that's happening. He says he knows a ton more about jinn, but it makes him realize all of the different things they're capable of. And he said to this day, he still experiences stuff that he thinks must be an attack from a jinn. And so that's going to do it for today's story. If you find yourself enjoying this story or any of the other ones on my channel, please allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, and it allows me to continue to do what I love, which is telling terrifying tales. Second, all of my stories are first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. Today's story came from Reddit. I'm going to link that story below, and so you guys can all read the original piece if you'd like to. But if you or anybody you know has a story that would fit well on my channel and you think that you want it told, please reach out on any of my social media. I monitor them all very closely. We'll find a time to get together. I'll collect your story and hopefully feature it one day here on the Orator. And so, until next time, where you will pull up your chair, my fire will be stoked, and I will have another tale to tell.